Roy Pulver, a retired Delta Force soldier, is trapped in a relentless time loop, reliving the same day over and over again. He's already gone through more than 140 resets, and by now, he's memorized every threat that the day throws at him. His morning always starts the same way. Right at 7 a.m. a man breaks into his apartment and tries to kill him and the woman he slept with. But Roy has learned how to deal with this intruder easily. He even shows off by putting on his clothes while brutally killing the man. Moments later, a helicopter hovers outside his window, and a shooter armed with a minigun unleashes a barrage of bullets on his apartment. Roy, having failed dozens of times in earlier loops, now knows exactly when to duck, dodge, and retaliate. With precise timing, he throws a knife that hits the shooter in the forehead. The shooter then loses control and sprays bullets everywhere, accidentally killing the pilot. The helicopter crashes into the apartment, leaving Roy no choice but to leap out the window and land on a truck filled with sand. It is revealed that this stunt took him more than 20 attempts to master. From there, Roy hijacks a car and takes off through the city streets, immediately pursued by 2 assassins in a van. On better days, Roy maneuvers through traffic, dodges a bus at just the right time, and loses them with a risky swerve. But on days when he's even slightly off, a crash or a stray bullet resets everything in an instant. Each loop might begin the same, but tiny details shift depending on what Roy remembers or changes. There are several other assassins who come after our hero to finish him off. There's Guan Yin, a ruthless swordmaster who often ends up decapitating him. Kaboom, a tiny lunatic who likes to stick bombs on him. A pair of twins, who shoot rocket launchers at him, and even a man who looks exactly like Roy, so he calls him Roy number 2. Sometimes, when he survives long enough, Roy reaches Jake's Diner, one of the rare calm points in his daily hell. He sits down, orders 2 bottles of liquor, and drinks heavily while listening to Dave, a conspiracy nut obsessed with internal security. Sitting nearby is Dai Fang, a fencing expert who has won the world championship several times. But when the clock strikes 12:47 p.m. all the mercenaries who are still alive show up at once and shoot Roy to death. Roy doesn't know why he's trapped in this loop or how it started, but he suspects it has something to do with his ex-wife, Gemma. She's a brilliant scientist and the only person who might have the answers. But when Roy tries to call her lab, her boss, Colonel Clive Venter, answers and says that Gemma has died in an accident. Roy obviously finds this fishy and believes that she was murdered. But he never gets to find out the real truth as he is killed one way or another. One afternoon, when Roy gets killed again, he remembers the final day before the time loop began. It starts with a visit to his ex-wife, Gemma Wells, at Dino Laboratories, where she works on advanced experimental technology. Roy arrives after receiving a message from her saying the lab is hiring new security staff. At first, it seems like a job interview, but the interaction feels off from the start. Gemma barely acknowledges his resume and doesn't talk to him politely. Instead, she focuses on taking measurements of his body and, without explanation, pulls out a sample of his hair which draws some blood. Meanwhile, Colonel Clive Venter and his head of security, Brett, watch the entire exchange via surveillance. As Roy starts asking questions about the strange equipment in the lab, Gemma tells him that the device she's working on is the Osiris Spindle, a machine that can manipulate time and space. She warns that if misused, it has the potential to unravel reality itself. As their conversation unfolds, Roy manages to bring up a personal matter, their son, who doesn't know Roy is his real father. Roy admits that he can live with losing Gemma because of his past mistakes, but insists he deserves a place in their child's life. Before the conversation can go further, Brett steps in, citing security regulations and claiming the lab is a restricted area. When Roy offers his resume, Brett simply dismisses it, saying they're not hiring. This finally reveals that there was no vacancy and Gemma had lied to get her ex-husband into the facility. Still, before Roy is escorted out, Gemma whispers something crucial. She's sent him a birthday package and tells him to remember the word Osiris. Meanwhile, from his office, Venter, the project's founder, is clearly alarmed by Roy's curiosity and how much he's overheard. After reviewing Roy's background, he decides the man could become a liability. Hence, instead of sending official personnel, he instructs Brett to hire mercenaries, random, untraceable killers who won't be tied back to the lab. Later that evening, Roy heads to a bar, where he tries to distract himself from the day's confusion with alcohol and meaningless company. He meets Alice, a dental assistant, and they end up back at his place. But before anything happens, Roy gets a call from Gemma. She sounds panicked and tells him she's about to do something drastic. She needs his help, but before she can finish, Venter cuts the call off. Roy senses something's wrong, but instead of pressing further, He returns to drinking and spends the night with Alice, ignoring his gut feeling. On the other hand, Gemma makes her move. She places the sample of his hair, mixed with his blood, into a small tube and inserts it into the Osiris spindle. She does it quietly, fully aware that she's crossing a line. But her actions don't go unnoticed. Watching through the cameras, Venter realizes that Gemma has gone insane, so he immediately sends Brett to stop her before she can go any further. That was the last night Roy lived before being confined to this hellish loophole. After revisiting the memory of his last conversation with Gemma, Roy realizes there's something he's overlooked during all these loops. He never opened the birthday present she told him to check. Back in his apartment, in the brief window before his usual death, he finally locates the package. Inside, he finds a book titled Isis and Osiris. The cover has pictures of ancient Egyptians, and on the backside, Gemma has written a cryptic note, "Time waits for no man." Furious, Roy becomes so fixated on the book that he loses track of time and forgets to take his usual precautions. In one loop, he gets gunned down by the helicopter before finishing the first page. In another, he tries to read the book while driving, ends up missing a crucial turn, and is obliterated by an oncoming bus. After these two ridiculous failures, Roy finally gets serious. During the next cycle, he hijacks the usual car, but this time he notices a nitro button on the dashboard he had never tried before. Pressing it unleashes a burst of speed that helps him shake his pursuers, but it also causes him to overshoot the turn toward Jake's diner. Instead, he ends up at an underground shopping mall. Roy ventures inside, finds a bench and begins reading the book properly. He notices that several paragraphs are underlined by Gemma, but he still can't make sense of how an ancient Egyptian myth connects to his endless, bloody Groundhog Day. His focus breaks when he spots his son, Joe, buying something from an older kid. For a moment, Roy forgets everything else. With Gemma gone, Joe is the only family he has left, and the boy still doesn't know he is his father. Roy follows him into a nearby arcade, where rows of analog monitors and old gaming setups buzz and glitch every time he gets close. But Roy doesn't even notice this, as he's only focused on his son. Inside the crowded game store, he finds Joe and casually confronts him, asking why he's skipping school. Joe assures him that the purchase was harmless, just collectible cards, not narcotics or anything shady. Roy then tries to build a connection and invites him for lunch. As they leave the mall together, Roy glances at a nearby clock and is stunned. It's already 12:50 p.m. It is 3 minutes past his dying time, and he has never lived this long in the loop before. Following this, Roy starts putting things together. The underground mall is shielded by thick concrete, which naturally interferes with signals. Somehow, he's being tracked, and this place is the only reason he's ever lasted beyond 1247. But just as he begins to form a plan, the assassins catch up to him. Roy instinctively grabs Joe and tries to run away from there, but he's pierced by a barrage of bullets. Although Roy ends up dying, he finally reveals to Joe that he's his father. When the loop resets again, Roy doesn't follow his usual script. He takes down the assassin who always barges into his apartment. But instead of killing him, he holds him and interrogates him about the tracker. The man refuses to talk, so Roy shoves him in front of the incoming helicopter minigun and watches him get torn apart. Still determined, Roy visits Mr. Chow's bar and runs to the bathroom to search his body for the tracker. He checks every inch of himself, even resorting to the most unpleasant places imaginable. Things get more uncomfortable when a stranger catches him in the act, but Roy pretends it's some kind of kink and shoos him away. He then continues looking for the device but doesn't manage to find anything. Later, on his way out of the bar, Roy spots Dave, the security and surveillance expert, and suddenly remembers that he might actually know where such devices are usually hidden. After some prodding, Dave suggests that trackers are often implanted in teeth, usually a molar. This triggers a vivid memory. Alice, the dental assistant Roy had spent the night with before the loop started, putting him under anesthesia while Brett, Venter's right-hand man, stood nearby. Realizing he's been played, Roy grabs a bottle of liquor and a pair of pliers from Jake and heads back to the bathroom with Dave. There, he starts yanking out his molars one by one. It's messy, painful, and horrifying, but eventually he finds the tracker. Just as he breathes a sigh of relief, the bathroom door bursts open and Roy number 2 storms in, killing him instantly. When the next cycle begins, Roy makes sure to reach Alice before she disappears. This time, he confronts her and demands to know the truth. A frightened Alice admits that Brett paid her to implant the tracker during their night together. She also claims that she didn't know the full story, so Roy lets her go. Now that he's armed with this information, Roy resumes his routine, but he knows exactly which tooth to pull and where to go. He removes the tracker again and takes it to an abandoned building. There, he sets it down as bait and waits. Shortly after, one of the bounty hunters arrives right on schedule. Roy confronts her and demands to know who hired her, but she refuses to answer. This prompts him to kill her with her own gun without hesitation. From that moment on, everything changes. Without the tracker helping him out, Roy finds himself with real freedom inside the loop. He uses his deep understanding of every assassin's tactics to take them down one by one, using their own methods against them. In a particularly gruesome loop, Roy gathers the bodies of the mercenaries and drags them to an abandoned factory, where he loads them with explosives. After setting them off, Roy uses Kaboom's phone to contact Brett. He sends out a clear warning that he's coming for revenge. With all the assassins behind him and only Brett and Colonel Clive Venter left, Roy sets his sights on the source of it all, Dino Laboratories. But storming the place turns out to be much harder than he thought. In one loop, he tries to ram through the front entrance with a car at full speed, only to crash and get shot by Brett. In another, he attaches explosives to the vehicle and lets it roll forward driverless, hoping to breach the security gate. But the plan falls apart before he even gets close. After several failed cycles, Roy finally slows down and takes a different approach. Instead of charging and head first, he quietly eliminates one of the mercenaries from earlier in the day, strips him of his uniform and ID badge, and tries to slip into the building disguised as security. But the elevator doesn't recognize the ID card, and when the guard inside asks to see it, Roy panics. That loop ends with another bullet. In the next try, he decides to deal with the elevator guard before entering, eliminating him ahead of time. He makes it farther than ever before, reaching the correct floor, only to be greeted by Brett and several other guards. Realizing there's no escape, Roy kills himself to reset. In the next attempt, he finally spots a security camera he had missed before, one that alerts his presence every time he gets to that floor. Roy also realizes that the mercenary whose ID he stole didn't have access to the restricted area. He thus changes tactics and finds a real security guard outside the building. After eliminating him, Roy swaps his uniform and ID. The plan surprisingly works, and the elevator lets him through this time without issue. As Roy steps into the laboratory level, he stealthily eliminates unsuspecting guards and moves deeper into the building. But he soon comes across Guan Yin, the sword expert. Without wasting words, she charges at him with her sword. Roy doesn't even get a chance to raise his weapon as she cuts down his pistol before decapitating him. In the next loop, he tries again, this time with a submachine gun. But the result is the same as Guan Yin is too fast for him. She manages to dodge all of his attacks before slicing his head off. In some instances, she even leaves him alive just enough for Venter to taunt him with philosophical nonsense before finishing him off. One loop drags longer than usual, and during it, Roy actually listens to Venter's speech. This is when he hears the name of the project for the first time, the Osiris Spindle, and it finally starts making sense. Venter doesn't even know the machine is functioning, but Gemma did, and she must have used it for a reason. This new realization changes everything. For the first time in ages, Roy doesn't just feel angry or desperate. He feels empowered. He feels glad that Gemma believed in him and becomes determined to stop this madness. In the next loop, Roy resets like usual, takes out the assassin in his apartment, removes the tracker in the diner's bathroom. But instead of heading to the lab, he heads straight to the Chinese restaurant. He then approaches Dai Fan, the world fencing champion who frequents the place. Roy tells her he wants to learn, and she gladly agrees to train him. What follows is a long string of loops focused entirely on swordsmanship. Roy spends dozens of cycles learning how to fight, how to move, how to anticipate. Every loop ends in death, but each one brings a little more progress. He loses again and again, but he keeps getting better. Eventually, he gets good enough to defeat Dai Fang herself, and she acknowledges that he's ready. Armed with skill and determination, Roy heads back into Dina one more time. The first phase goes smoothly. He bypasses security, eliminates guards, and steps back into the room with Guan Yin. But this time, he doesn't draw a gun, he simply takes one of the swords from the wall. Following this, the much anticipated showdown begins. Roy, who is now disciplined and focused, manages to block every strike. He dodges her swings and starts playing with her just to show off. Roy even cuts off her ponytail mid-combat to show his superiority. Eventually, when he grows tired of the dance, he stabs her through the chest with her own weapon. Moments later, Brett and Venter arrive at the scene. An armed Brett then charges forward, but Roy easily manages to finish him off by impaling him in the forehead with a sword. Then, he approaches Venter and challenges him to a one-on-one duel. The latter agrees and they start going hammer and tongs at each other. At one point, Venter gains the upper hand and tries to grab his fallen pistol. But Roy swiftly picks up his sword and drives it into Venter's hand, pinning it to the floor. After this, he finally reveals that Gemma used the spindle, and he has been in this loop since ages. But an arrogant Venter responds by mocking him, saying he should have used his endless time to protect his son instead. He implies that Joey might already be in danger. Upon hearing this, a worried Roy immediately kills Venter and rushes out of the lab. He jumps into a car and speeds toward the mall, the last place he saw his son alive. But when he gets there, the nightmare becomes reality. Police tape surrounds the area and coroners carry out a small, covered body. Roy tries to run toward them, screaming for Joe, but the officers restrain him. Just when the situation couldn't get any worse, a massive bright wave rolls over the horizon. Roy is so distraught by the death of his son that he doesn't even turn back to witness the apocalypse. As Gemma had warned, prolonged exposure to the Osiris spindle causes a complete collapse of time and space. Roy has been inside the loop for too long, and his continued existence is unraveling reality itself. But right after everything goes black, Roy wakes up in his bed at 7 a.m. as usual. Now burdened with the knowledge that he's not just fighting enemies, but is also the cause of the world's destruction, Roy sinks into despair. He gives up and stays in his bed, allowing the mercenaries to finish him off easily. But one morning, after being killed in the usual way, Roy wakes up with clarity. He decides that if the world is going to keep resetting endlessly, then he might as well use it to do something meaningful. He stops running and starts to live the same day differently. Roy drives straight to the underground mall where his son, Joe, usually hangs out. Instead of thinking about strategies or attacks, he picks Joe up and simply spends the day with him. They play every arcade game available, share meals, and laugh like a father and son should have all along. For several cycles, Roy does nothing but repeat these moments with Joe, letting go of his anger and allowing himself to experience the simple joy of being with the boy he never got to raise. But every time, no matter how peaceful or perfect the day seems, it always ends the same way, with the world collapsing into light as the Osiris spindle resets the loop. It's during one of these quiet days with Joe that Roy finally dares to bring up Gemma. Until now, he had never wanted to shatter the illusion by mentioning her, but something compels him to ask. Joe tells him that his mom never came home the night before, but she called him early in the morning to tell him that if something happened, he should go find Roy. That simple revelation jolts Roy. He had always assumed that Gemma had been killed sometime during the night, shortly after her desperate phone call to him from the bar. But now, if she was alive long enough to call Joe after 7 a.m., then that means when Roy wakes up in his bed at the start of each cycle, she is still alive, at least for a few precious minutes. Roy immediately checks Joe's phone and confirms the call happened at exactly 7:03 a.m. in the next cycle. He heads back to the facility to confront the bad guys. After finishing them off, he finds Gemma's body inside the lab. Roy checks the security footage and sees that Brett killed her at exactly 7:14 a.m. This means that Roy has a narrow 14-minute window from the time he wakes up to prevent her death. With this new urgency, Roy ends the cycle and begins again with a plan. This time, he kills the first mercenary, then instead of throwing the knife at the helicopter gunner like usual, he jumps straight into the chopper and kicks the shooter out. Holding the pilot at gunpoint, Roy orders him to fly directly to Dino Laboratories as fast as possible. The helicopter weaves over the city, dodging gunfire and arriving at the building within minutes. Roy grabs the minigun from the side of the aircraft and storms into the facility. As the guards and mercenaries arrive, Roy obliterates them with bullets. When it runs out of ammunition, he grabs a sword and a pistol and continues his violent rampage. Anyone who stands in his way is quickly dispatched. Shortly after, Roy bursts into the lab just in time to see Brett about to finish off Gemma. Without hesitation, he drives the sword through Brett and turns his attention to Colonel Venter, who tries to escape. Roy catches him mid-run and shoots him dead as well. He then approaches Gemma for the first time since the loop began. After their emotional reunion, Gemma explains that the problem is far from over. The Osiris spindle is still active and unstable. She tells him that during her last moments of freedom, she used Roy's hair and blood to encode his DNA into the missing mass the machine needed to function. That's why the loops always start with him. He isn't just caught in the spindle's field, he is the field and the anomaly. And unless that anomaly is resolved, the chain reaction will continue endlessly until the universe collapses in on itself. There is only one possible solution left. If Roy enters the spindle and returns his genetic mass to the core, the machine should stabilize. It will restart time properly, ending the loop permanently and resetting the world as it should be. However, Gemma is honest with him, this is only a theory. She built the machine under pressure, without testing, and has no idea if Roy will survive the process. He may die for real and never come back. If the machine resets time but he doesn't exist anymore, there is no do-over. This could be the last time they ever see each other. Despite learning of the risks, Roy proceeds with the task. He has lived this day more times than he can count, so he is ready to die once more for the sake of Gemma, Joe, and the entire world. After one last kiss, he steps away from her and walks toward the glowing center of the Osiris spindle. As the machine hums and pulses around him, Roy looks back at Gemma one final time and tells her he loves her. The movie ends on a cliffhanger as the fate of the world remains unknown. If you enjoyed this movie recap, please like the video and comment below what movie we should recap next. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, then make sure to subscribe to our channel, and until next time guys, I will see you all in the next one. Take care.